Hi, welcome to the Visionista podcast. I'm your host, Jessica East of Noir Marketing and PR. This podcast is for entrepreneurs where we talk about business and work-life balance. Hi, thanks for joining the Visionista. I am your host, Jessica East, and I am here today with Brittany Doggett of Pickrel, Schaeffer Ebeling in Dayton, Ohio.
Hi, it's great to be here.
Well, thanks for coming. I really appreciate you taking the time out to chat. Today's topic is succession planning. And she is an expert in all of those plans and helping people go through that process, because it's a process, like any legal thing, there is a process to it. So I wanted to dive right in. Tell us, a minute about what exactly you do at the firm, and then what is succession planning?
Sure. So I am an estate planning attorney. I do estate planning and probate here in the firm. So basically, my focus is making sure that if something happens, either you're disabled for some reason or unfortunately death occurs, that your assets are transitioned the way that you want them to be. So this is just different types of planning for us, whether it's through the use of trusts or, simple things like wills. What comes into place when we have succession planning for business is basically trying to figure out how your business is going to run if you are no longer there. So part of this is bringing in our business department, who can help us make sure all of the documents are in place on that side. Mainly what I do is focus on trying to make sure that in those worst case scenarios, we've got everything in place so that, if somebody needs to take over for a temporary time, we've got someone in place. If you're deciding, I need to get out of the business now for health reasons, family reasons, it can transition and still run smoothly if you need the income from the business, things like that. All of that needs to be in place. And so we work with individuals. As I said, we have a business department here. I'm in the estate planning, but we also help with tax issues when you're doing this transition with business. So succession planning is really just the idea of how is your business going to continue if you're not there, or if you are there, how are you going to transition it to either the next generation, if that's who you want it to go to, or different owners if you have somebody else that you've groomed in place to become your successor.
Mm-hmm. And this is important because, it's not just for, you mentioned income, it's not just your own personal income or your family's income. If you are a small to medium-sized business, many of us have close relationships with our clients. So if something were to happen to us and the business hit a snag, even if it was running, but it was like slowly limping along, that could really negatively impact your clients as well. So, having the plan together means that no one is negatively impacted should something happen.
And that's part of that smooth transition where if somebody's taking over or is, moving to the next generation, you want it to basically be as smooth and seamless as possible. And part of that is having those documents in place. So one of the reasons I'm very much concerned about this area is that with my estate planning, I also do probate, and probate is basically the process after somebody passes away. And unfortunately, we tend to see these situations where there is a family business. It's gone on strong, it's provided income to multiple family members, the kids are involved, but there wasn't a succession plan in place. So suddenly we've got to probate a business, take it through the court system, and there's concerns about how are we going to pay taxes if there are. Hopefully, the business is done very well, and we hit kind of those issues where there might be taxes. We hit the issue of who is going to take it over. And sometimes we're dealing with issues of one child has been the one involved in the business. They've really been the one running it, but through probate, the will says 50-50. How are we going to split this? How are we going to handle it? So this is really the chance to cut off a lot of those issues and prevent any difficulties, again, if you should pass, or, I think a lot of times of the disability where, you're the person really running the business, you've been the key behind it this whole time. but suddenly you're in a car accident. Is everything in place where, hey, your successor can step in, take care of it, or you've got somebody in place who can run the business while you're recovering? And you're right, there are, employees who are going to be relying on this. There are clients who are going to be relying on the business, and you don't want that drop to occur because you're not able to be there to help.
Mm-hmm. All really, really good points and all really, really important things to think about. So, we kind of dipped our toes into it. Who needs a succession plan?
So I think this is one where people are like, a lot of times people think they don't need a succession plan if they're kind of a smaller business. But honestly, if you are a business owner, you really do need a succession plan if you want the business to continue on after you're gone, or after you retire. So anybody who wants basically their business to continue needs to have a succession plan in place. And I think a lot of people get a little nervous when they hear about succession planning because they think it's going to be this huge deal. But if you're running a small LLC, it's not going to be quite as complicated as if you've got the multi-million-dollar family business with multiple generations involved. And every person on that scale needs to have some sort of succession planning, and it really does need to be personalized and tailored to each individual. And as I said, there are different aspects to these succession plans. So we're thinking about what documents are in place for the business, having your operating agreements, or depending on your type of business, all of that paperwork in place, someone who knows where it is, what needs filed each year. Then you're looking at the estate plans where, if something happens, how is the business going to continue? Are there buy-sell agreements in place? Do we have insurance in place if somebody does pass away and we need to buy somebody out? Also, kind of at the tax side, how much is the business generated? What is it worth? Where if someone passes away and we're moving it to the next generation, are there going to be tax consequences? Should we be worried about donations for charities, things like that, where we can help reduce some of this issue that could occur?
Mm-hmm. And that is excellent, as well. The tax ramifications when someone passes. I've had another friend. I hadn't known anyone to actually pass of COVID since the whole pandemic started until just recently. And then
Mm-hmm.
I've had several people, um, kind of close in my bubble pass either of COVID, or there's been some other natural causes too. But one of my friends, her husband passed, and her father, um, also he passed, or he's very close to passing, and so she's going through all of these end of life arrangements. And his property, there's a bit of a tax, we'll call it a fiasco, and it's really stressing her out. So not only is she dealing with all the emotional stuff of having to say goodbye to her parent, but now she's having the stress of, this tax bill and trying to figure out where things stand. And I think it's really easy to forget about those things, kind of out of sight, out of mind. So anything you can do to leave your loved ones with less of a headache, I think is really, I just think it's good planning, and it's good so that they can have, a moment to kind of grieve and stop, and they don't have to be thrust immediately into, courts. And nobody wants to mess with the IRS. That just,
No.
that seems like not a good time at all.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason I really like doing the estate planning side is that I always tell people our job is really to provide peace of mind for you, that if something happens, you've got something in place, however your plan works out, so that your family doesn't have to kind of deal with grief and trying to untangle a mess at the same time. So you know what's going to happen, you know how your wealth is going to transfer, or your business is going to transfer, and your family has that ability to breathe and just take the moment to grieve. Because I've seen so many situations where they're dealing with the loss of a loved one, and at the same time they have boxes of stuff they're trying to go through because,
Oh my gosh.
dad threw everything into a box. He understood his record system, but nobody else understands his record system. And,
Yeah.
it's hard because they really do need that moment because they've just lost, a loved one. They need the ability to step back just to kind of take care of themselves and their mental health. And so you're kind of doing the favor for your next generation when you've got that in place. Or, the employee who suddenly you've been trying to groom to take over, who's thrust into this new role.
Mhm.
If they've got the, hey, here's how we do this, here's where all of this bank accounts are, how do we do our payroll, all of that that's been trained for that transition, it's going to give them the ability to just kind of work on autopilot while they're dealing with the loss.
Mhm. And, just listening to all the ins and outs, the business documents, the tax ramifications, the plans, all of this, like I am getting overwhelmed just sitting here, but that's the joy of being able to work with someone like you
Yeah.
because this is literally all you do every day. So what's overwhelming to me and kind of like making my heart stop, this is where you really excel.
Yeah, and here's the thing is setting up these plans is not something that has to be done overnight. It's a process. So once you have something in place, one of the things is when we have people finally sign, I've got a pen in my hand, so I'm miming signing, but once they finally sign those documents, there's a moment for a lot of people where it's like that was just a relief because you got something started. But you can really build, and the hope is, you start your business young, you start getting these documents in place, and the business is going to grow throughout your life. So there's going to be additions. So we may start out with something small where we're just handling, an LLC, but you're going to transition, you're going to be into the corporations later. And then, the hope is, hey, my business is so big, I can use a family trust company or something else where we're dealing with dynasty trusts, all of this where your business is going to last through the next couple of generations. And the concern is, if we don't have this in place, you may not really have that family legacy because the transition from generation to generation is not going to occur the way it should.
Mhm. No, those are good points. And you brought up the process to create a plan because it is a process and I'm sure it
It
varies based
is.
on size. How would you kick that process off? Like if you're listening right now and you're like, oh crap, I need to get that in place. I haven't even thought of that. What would your first step be to kick off
Well,
that process?
you really want to start kind of just thinking through a couple of questions about your business. So one thing you want to think about is how would your business, and it's part of you thinking and part of talking to an attorney or talking to a specialist in these areas. But
Mhm.
if something happens to you today or you're disabled, how long is your business going to survive? Is it able to survive without you? Do you have somebody who's in that role as a second in command? It could be a child, it could be an employee, but are they going to be able to step up if something happens to you? And have you given them the tools to do that? So do they know how to run the business if you're not there?
Mhm.
And then kind of thinking of a timeline of how long do you want to be involved in the business? So right now we're seeing a lot of kind of boomers who've been in these businesses their whole life. They developed it young, and the transition out of the business is a very hard process for them because they've never really thought of doing anything else. And do they need the income from the business to continue? Is that something that we need to work into their plans? Or for other business owners, is this something you've started where you want to start this business and just sell it off because it's done so well, live off of that money? Are we doing a plan then for trying to, sell the business once it reaches a certain point? And part of it too, when we're dealing with family business successions, is do you have the family members who are going to want to take over this business? We have people where we'll talk to them and they say, I want to leave it to my son and my daughter. But when you talk to son and daughter, they're like, I want nothing to do with this business. So the
We just don't
plans,
want to tell dad.
yes, but that leaves it in a very awkward position. So it really, if that's the plan, is it's going to stay in the business, have those discussions been held so that we know we're going to transition from, mom and dad to son. And if we're transitioning from mom and dad to son and there's daughter, have we had a discussion on, what daughter is going to receive? If, say, the business is very valuable, because you don't want to cause the disagreement in the family or end up getting, into the court system where there's a fight over that business. So, with that, maybe we're leaving son business, but we leave daughter something else of equal value, or son buys out the business, and that way we can go ahead and pay daughter to make it equal. So, and just part of it is, if you're wanting to move it to the next generation, are we able to, kind of fragment things? Can we do it so son is a share owner, daughter is a share owner, or is there a way we can split the business? Just because if they're two very strong personalities, sometimes you get the butting of heads when they're both going to be in control. So sorry, that's a lot of questions to kind of go, but really it's, there's a lot more to think about in that for how are we going to go to the next generation? So it's a matter of kind of sitting down and thinking those through, but you can sit down, as I said, with an attorney. You can, and business attorneys can help you, especially when you're younger, sort of think through the initial parts of growing the business. With the estate attorney, we're here for the issues of, hey, if I'm disabled, how's my business going to keep running? If the worst happens, do I have everything in place? So it's one of those where it's sort of dependent upon, do I want to sit down with just the business attorney? Do I want to sit down with business and estate right now, kind of thinking it through? And really, a lot of it is just, how do I want it to continue as a business? Do I want it to go to family? Do I want it to provide the income for my family? And, so some people, as I said, it may be a small business. It's just you. We get a lot of, people doing real estate, things like that, where the plan is, I'm going to sell all of these properties when I'm gone, and just the money gets split among kids. To where we're dealing with some businesses that are huge, where we do have multi-million-dollar businesses with multi-generations. What are we going to put in place so that this business continues, that there's not going to be family infighting? So as I said, it's the scale from, just simple business all the way through with these family businesses. And I don't deal with most of like the large businesses. I deal with family.
Well, and all those are really good things to consider, because I think the last thing anyone would want, whether they're facing end of life and, transitioning, or if they've already passed, wherever you end up beyond, if you can see what's going on now, I think the last thing anybody would want would be to see their kids or, siblings or grandchildren or whatever fighting and, really getting messy and ugly over who gets what. And, that's not necessarily uncommon, which is why it's so important to get some of those plans into place, and then have at least, an overview conversation like, hey guys, this is where the papers are. This is the person to call, or, the firm to call. They have all the information. This is what I want. This is what I expect. Don't make me die a second death by your foolish behavior out in public.
Yeah, and I always call it kind of your emergency sheet. Everybody should have, individuals should have it, but as a business, it's a little bit more than a sheet for businesses, but it's still something where this is our contingency. Something happens to me, here's everything you need to do, here's who you need to call. And having that organization in place just makes such a big difference. And when you talk about, talk with the next generation, that's huge, because I have a lot of people who struggle to, they don't feel like they should let their kids know what their plan is. And that's usually not a great approach. Yeah. I mean, for some people it is because there are family issues. They have a child who they know there's no way they can handle the business, but they don't want to really let them know that. But the family discussion ahead of time helps resolve some of these issues. The biggest thing in all of law where we see breakdowns is the lack of communication, either between parties, between family members, because not everyone either understands what the plan was or understands why that plan was chosen.
Mhm.
And so trying to prevent those issues where you want to do something so you're not going to have your kids end up in court, it does make sense to try to talk to them. So,
Mhm.
if I'm leaving the business to Jane because she's the one who's always been involved, she knows the day to day, she's the successor I've groomed. I need to explain to John why I've done this and make sure there aren't going to be hard feelings, or, that trying to figure out how to equalize it so John feels like he got something as well.
Mhm.
Sometimes you don't have that because, you have a child who's not been involved in your life, and that might be a letter that you've written to them that will be given to them upon death, something where at
Mhm.
least there's an explanation of why you did this. They're not going to be happy about it, but it helps resolve some of those times where someone comes in and they're stating, hey, mom and dad wanted this. Well, no, that's not what mom and dad wanted. And we've got that in the plan that that's not what mom and dad wanted.
Yeah. And giving everybody the opportunity to ask questions and to understand, I think is a really good thing to do. I'm the type of person personally, I need to understand why. Like, why did
Yeah.
something happen? I don't know why. It just gives me peace and like, oh, okay, well, this is what we need to do then because this is why. So
Yeah.
understanding why someone made a decision, how many times has someone passed and there's all kinds of unanswered questions about all
Mhm.
sorts of things, not just business related things, but if you had the opportunity to ask them, why did you choose to do this and have them explain it to you so that it made sense? I think that could also, kind of calm some of maybe the arguments before they even have a chance to start. Be like, well, I understand why he did this. So then it's not an issue where maybe if you didn't have that conversation, it could develop into an issue, and create lasting issues with siblings. So I think all those are really, really good things to think about.
And one thing, right now, the use of Zoom has been really helpful for some of these facilitating these has been really helpful to facilitate these conversations,
Mhm.
because I, as the attorney, can get, talk to my clients, and then we, if they're okay with it, we can have a discussion with their kids then, and everybody's on together, and I can explain, here's what the plan is. And so part of it is I'm doing the explaining from the legal standpoint so
Mhm.
that the kids can ask, why are we doing this legally? And then the parents are there for, why are we doing this within the family? And I
Mhm.
think that helps a little bit because, you've got somebody facilitating the conversation. And just because of the way things have been, that's been something that I found has actually been very helpful. And that way we can have a child involved who may be out in Texas or California, who
Mhm.
normally wouldn't be here for a meeting, but we've brought him into the meeting now so we can discuss it. You know, and in their head, they always thought mom intended for me to run the business when, she's gone. And now mom's saying, oh, this child's going to run it instead, or, oh, I'm going to actually leave it to my, workers. We're going to do something along those lines.
Mhm.
And suddenly they're, it's gives them time to process it, gives them time to talk to mom about what they thought was going to happen before, mom's no longer there to talk to.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. I definitely think that people should get this on their list of things to do. So we talked a little bit about, you working with people in the very beginning stages of building their business. One
Mhm.
of the questions I wanted to make sure we covered were, when do you know that you need a succession plan? I've started my business from
Mhm.
nothing. And so it's really easy when you start from nothing and you're building and you're working, and maybe you're working a couple other jobs too to make ends meet, to always kind of think, oh, I'm too small for that, I'm not ready for that yet. So when should you really, have these conversations with yourself or another professional to get these succession plans in place?
No, I think this is going to depend on each individual, but my personal opinion is, once you've got your business established, this really should start being something you think about. Because even when you're small, say you are an LLC, well, do we assign those shares of your LLC into a trust that's then going to be used for your children? It's even if you're small, there's still things to take into account because your business has value.
Mhm.
You have value, working at the business. So do we need to put something into place? Because if you're injured, if you can't work, do we have insurance to cover the day-to-day operations, things along those lines? So I think personally, succession planning should be kind of built into the creation of a business,
Okay.
because when you're creating a business, you're not creating it hopefully for short term. You want it to be a very long term process,
Mhm.
and most people do want to be able to pass it on or sell it. So that succession planning, you really want to kind of bake it in from the beginning.
Mhm. And that's, I'll share with our listeners. You and I talked about this a little bit before we started recording. What spurred this discussion today? Succession planning has been like in the back of my brain for a while. One of your colleagues, Mike, and I had talked about it a couple years ago, and then it kind of got backburnered because other things came up, and I still need to work on mine too. So I'm right there with you guys. I need to work on mine too. I have like a plan in my head. It just hasn't been put like legally down on paper yet, so anybody else can figure out what we're doing. But two and a half weeks ago now, I had a good friend I've known since actually junior high, seventh grade. We graduated high school together. He built a lawn care business, and he'd been really working at it for years and years, and he was pretty successful at it. Single dad. He'd bust his butt all spring, summer, and fall, and then in the winter, when you're not mowing grass and taking care of things, they had enough to live comfortably on, over the cold. We're in Ohio. Reminder, like it's cold here from November till about, March. Nothing grows. So he'd make enough to not only live off of in the summer, but to also, carry all of them through the winter months as well. And he was diagnosed with COVID. And for the first 2 weeks that he knew that he was sick, I'm not going to say he was great, but he was, at home doing okay. They had no reason to believe that he would not survive from his, bout of COVID with the severity that he'd had it. And then one day he just couldn't breathe. And this was after having it, 2 weeks after his diagnosis. And so they took him quickly to Miami Valley, which is here in Dayton. And they said, we need to do this particular procedure. I don't remember what it was exactly. We need to do this particular procedure for you, but we can't do it here. We have to send you down to UC. That's in Cincinnati. And he sent a note to our friend who is an attorney and was like, this is what's going on. I have to go for this procedure. And they were going to put him under for this procedure. And he's like, I need to make sure that everything's in place just in case. And our friend got back to him with some information, and then he never responded back to our friend. And so after he had passed, he went down to UC, they did this procedure, and he never woke up. And he's got two kids, this business, and the other friend, the attorney friend, and I had lunch last week, and he said, I hope that he got that taken care of, because he was really worried about it. So here he is in the hospital with COVID, and trying just to get better, worried about his kids and his family. And then it was kind of like, oh crap, my business, what happens if I die? And so he did pass, and one of his nephews, I think, is trying to continue the business, because here's this really great thing that he worked for years and years and years to build. And they can't find, typical of our friend, but they cannot find the records. They don't know who the clients are. There's no like one place with all the client listings. It's probably all in his phone. But there's no place that they can go and really pick up the ball and run with it. And so that was really when that happened. I mean, he was 42. No one plans on passing when they're 42 years old. And we talked about this a little bit before we started recording too. I think once people start pushing retirement age, 55, 60, 65, then it's kind of like, oh, well, maybe I should think about this. But you never know, illness, car accidents, all house fires, like all kinds of things happen to people, freak accidents every day. You really do, once you start building something, need to have the plans in place so that other people can pick it up and run with it if that's your wish. If you want it to carry on beyond your physical self, you really need to have those things in place.
I've seen it before. There are different lists for different things I've seen with succession planning. And I've seen you worry about the 4 or 5 Ds. I've seen it both ways, where you're worried about death, divorce, disability, disagreement, distress.
Mm-hmm.
And you really want those in place before you don't want the attorney rushing to the hospital to sign the documents.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you may be young. It may be one of those situations where and I always say this to clients, we're doing a lot of this planning in the hope that you never need it. But if you need it, it's going to save so much time later on. It's going to save your family money. It's going to save the stress and all of that, because you've done it now just in case something happens.
Yeah.
And, I see it frequently, unfortunately, where we do have somebody who's, young, and just something's occurred. The car accidents occurred. They've been traveling and something happens. And so when you've got those situations, having that plan in place already just relieves so much for the family members. You don't have to worry about, what's going to happen to them. Do we have, as in, the case of a small business where that's the family's income, do we have something in place if you do pass, that your family has money to maintain themselves? Because sometimes you have a spouse who's been part of the business, but they don't really know how to run it. And so we've got a kind of income gap as we're trying to get those individuals to the point where the business is back up and running.
Mm-hmm. And then one thing, I think you mentioned this a couple of minutes ago. Once you have these plans in place, should it be like a yearly or bi-yearly practice to go back and modify them? I also know you mentioned that you can build them in phases too as your business grows. Once you get those things in place, what is the best practice for making sure they're up to date?
So part of my suggestion for an individual is a yearly review for them to look at it, just to make sure it still represents their wishes, it still represents the business, because as I said, the hope is your business is grown, so maybe it's outgrown the plan, but you may not need to go get the changes made that frequently. It may be a change once every 5 years, once every 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
I do recommend at least talking to an attorney or CPA, people like that, at least once every 5 years, because of law changes. For instance, one thing that we're closely monitoring on the estate planning side right now is, we have this tax level where it's 11.7 million before we really worry about the federal estate tax. But based upon kind of what we've heard of a possible tax plan, that might be cut in half again. And it was minimal for years. So planning around that is really, just dependent upon what the law is.
Mm-hmm.
And so we may plan for a much lower level right now just to protect it in case that happens. And that's kind of one of those things we're working with people right now. But as I said, laws change. We get all sorts of different things. So you want to just be with that change. You just want to be up to date with those changes so that you don't have, say, a trust that suddenly is outdated, or you don't have a business plan that's not going to work because they've changed how some kind of transition is supposed to occur.
Mm-hmm. So as someone who enjoys simplification, because I have way too many things going on right now, It sounds like once you get these things set up, it might be good just to kind of put that in the same time as your insurance. Like my insurance for my business expires or is renewed, however you want to put that, in May every year.
Mm-hmm.
So once I get all of this up and running, so that I don't have to, A, so I don't forget it. And then B, so it's not creating tons and tons of extra work. If I just reviewed all of those documents at the same time, like you said, just because I'm reviewing them does not necessarily mean that I need to make changes. I'm just making sure it's still accurate.
Yeah. And I mean, I've got some situations where we're dealing with business succession documents that were created 20, 30 years ago, and they're nothing like what the individual wants now. So part of that is just making sure it's what your wishes are. And that's really, that's my job, is to hear, this is what I want to do. Here's who I want it to go to, and to make that happen. And so knowing the plan, knowing, hey, my documents aren't quite reflecting what I want, and coming to me means I can make those changes and get it to that point for you.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, thank you for sharing all of this info with us. I think if you had any questions coming into this chat, they've probably been answered right now, and you have kind of a roadmap of like what I need to do so that I can have a really good, meaningful conversation with someone to get the ball rolling. So you are able to operate in Ohio. So if you're in Dayton, Ohio, or Ohio, you can have Brittany help you with this, and I'll put your info in the notes section so people can connect with you. But you guys also operate outside of Dayton. Can you tell people where, like, other areas that you might be able to help them yourself?
So we have some attorneys here who are licensed in Florida, licensed in Michigan, licensed in New York. One thing I just always want to let people know is there is a big Ohio to Florida connection. And if you kind of go back and forth between them, that's one where you really want to make sure your estate plans are very clear, because Florida has some of the more complicated estate planning laws, and their
Why am I not
requirements
shocked
on
by this?
documents are different than some of, so, signing and all of that. So we actually will work with people with Florida attorneys too, just so that we are very clear on our Ohio side. And then we have some, in Florida, that this is going to pass through their system without difficulty.
Yeah, another reason to stay out of Florida, I guess. I am not a fan of Florida. Anyway, all right. Well, I'll put Brittany's information up. So if you would like to connect with her, you may. If Brittany can't help you, if you're out of the area, definitely, take some notes, take these things to heart, and have a good conversation with someone else to get the ball rolling and make sure you're covered. Everybody's going to move on at some point. So it's good to have all that stuff figured out and written down. So, Brittany, if you could sum everything up in, two or three sentences, what is like the point that you really want to make sure everybody takes away from today?
I want people to know, if you are a business owner, you need to have a succession plan in place, and you want to make sure that it is up to date and represents your wishes.
Awesome. All right. Thanks so much for chatting with us today, Brittany. This
It was great to be here.